My wife called me a dirty plumber in an argument, so I immediately demanded an apology, which she refused. I made a decision that changed our lives forever. Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. It would be great if you can also comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Randy Hansen from Oregon. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof of the old pickup truck as Jake rattled down the potholed street toward home. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, not from the storm but from the ache that throbbed deep in his bones. 12 hours on his feet, half of them knee-deep in a sewer trench, wrestling with a busted line that sprayed filth across his chest. The stench still clung to him, sour and stubborn, no matter how hard he'd scrubbed his hands at the gas station sink. His boots, caked with mud, squelched against the pedals. All he wanted was a hot shower, a cold beer, and 10 minutes of quiet before the world started barking at him again. Home was a sagging brick apartment building in the heart of Milton, a working-class town where rust and grit were as much a part of the landscape as the people. The streetlights flickered, casting weak pools of yellow across the cracked sidewalk as Jake parked and hauled himself out of the truck. His toolbox banged against his thigh, a familiar weight, like an extension of his arm. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step groaning under him, and fumbled with the keys. The door swung open, and there she was, Lena, standing in the cramped living room like a storm cloud ready to burst. "You see this?" she snapped, waving a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. Her voice sliced through the air, sharp as a blade. She wore one of his old flannel shirts over leggings, her dark hair pulled back tight, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "Rent notice. Late again." "What the hell, Jake?" He froze in the doorway, rain dripping off his jacket onto the worn carpet. The apartment smelled of burnt toast and stale coffee, a mess of takeout boxes and laundry spilling across the couch. It wasn't much, a lumpy sofa, a TV with a cracked remote, a kitchen counter piled with dishes, but it was theirs. Or had been. He set his toolbox down slow, like he was handling something fragile, and wiped a hand across his face. "I paid it," he said, voice low, gravelly from exhaustion. "Last week. Check the bank." Lena didn't budge. She tossed the notice onto the coffee table, where it landed among empty soda cans. "Oh, I'm supposed to trust you? Mr. Fix-It who can't even keep us afloat? I'm sick of this, Jake. Sick of scrambling while you play hero with your stupid pipes." The words stung, but he'd heard worse. 7 years married, and Lena's tongue had sharpened with every one. He kicked off his boots, mud flaking onto the floor, and shuffled toward the kitchen. "Long day, Lena. Can we not do this now?" "No, we're doing it now." She followed him, her bare feet slapping the linoleum. "You think I don't notice how you drag in here, stinking like a dumpster, expecting me to just smile and cook dinner? I'm not your maid." He yanked open the fridge, the dim light spilling across his face, squared jaw, tired eyes, a scruff of beard he hadn't bothered to shave. "I don't expect anything," he muttered, grabbing a beer. The cap twisted off with a hiss. "Just thought you'd see I'm trying. Sewer line burst today. Took 6 hours to patch. Overtime's coming. We're fine." "Fine." She laughed, a bitter sound that bounced off the peeling wallpaper. "You're a joke, Jake. Look at you, covered in crap, barely making enough to keep this dump. I deserve better than this." "Then you." He took a swig, the cold fizz doing nothing to cool the heat rising in his chest. He turned to face her, leaning against the counter, water still trickling from his hair down his neck. "Say that again," he said, quieter now, a warning in his tone. Her lips curled, eyes narrowing. "You're a dirty plumber, Jake. That's all you'll ever be." The room went still. The rain pounded harder outside, a dull roar against the windows, but inside, it was like the air had been sucked out. Dirty plumber. 2 words, simple, but they hit like a punch to the gut. He'd spent years, coming home late, skipping meals, pouring every dime into this life for her. The new coat she wore last winter, his overtime, the laptop she used for her freelance gigs, his busted knuckles, and now this. Dirty plumber. like he was nothing. "Apologize," he said, setting the beer down with a clink. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled at his sides. "Right now?" Lena blinked, caught off guard, then smirked. "For what? Telling it like it is? You smell like a sewer, Jake. Live with it." Something cracked inside him. Not loud, not explosive, but a quiet, final snap, like a pipe giving way under too much pressure. He stared at her, this woman he'd loved once, or thought he had. Her face was all angles and defiance. No trace of the softness he'd fallen for back when they were young and dumb and thought love could fix anything. He didn't shout, didn't throw the bottle. He just nodded, slow, like he was agreeing with some truth he'd been too tired to see. "We're done," he said. Her smirk faltered. "What?" "You heard me." He crossed the room, grabbed his toolbox from the floor, and slung it over his shoulder. The weight felt good, solid, like it was the only thing he could count on. "I'm not your punching bag. Not anymore." "Jake, wait." She stepped forward, her voice pitching up, but he was already at the door. "You can't just walk out. Watch me." He yanked the knob, the hinges squealing, and stepped into the hall. The rain hit him full force as he descended the stairs, soaking through his jacket, his jeans, his soul. His truck loomed ahead, a shadow in the downpour. He tossed the toolbox into the bed with a clang, climbed in, and slammed the door. The engine sputtered to life, headlights cutting through the dark. He didn't look back. Not at the apartment window where a silhouette stood, not at the life he was leaving. The wipers slashed across the windshield, frantic, but they couldn't clear the blur in his eyes. He drove, the road stretching out slick and endless, and all he could hear was that echo, "We're done," ringing in the silence as the storm swallowed him whole. Jake wasn't a man of big words or grand plans. He fixed things. Pipes, drains, toilets, stuff people didn't think about until it broke. And he'd tried to fix this, too. This marriage, this slow leak of a life. But some breaks couldn't be patched. Some words couldn't be unsaid. As the town lights faded in his rear view, he gripped the wheel tighter, the cold seeping into his skin. He had no clue where he was going, just away. Away from her, from the weight of her scorn, from the man he'd let himself become. The rain didn't let up, and neither did the ache. But for the first time in years, he felt something else stirring beneath it. Not hope, not yet. Just space. A crack wide enough to breathe. The spare room at Tom's place smelled like motor oil and regret, like a garage and a life left half-assembled. Jake lay on the sagging couch, staring at the ceiling where a water stain spread like a dark, brooding cloud. Boxes towered around him, some labeled tools or winter clothes, others just scrawled with a faded stuff. Tom hadn't unpacked since moving in 2 years ago, and Jake didn't care enough to ask why. The couch springs jabbed his back through the thin blanket, and every time he shifted, the frame creaked like it was begging for mercy. Sleep wouldn't come, not with the rain still drumming outside, a relentless echo of the night before, and not with Lena's voice looping in his head, "Dirty plumber, dirty plumber," like a scratched record he couldn't smash. He'd shown up at Tom's door past midnight, soaked to the bone, toolbox dangling from one hand. His younger brother, taller, leaner, with a mop of sandy hair and a perpetual grin, hadn't asked questions, just cracked the door wider, tossed him a towel, and pointed to the couch. "Stay as long as you need, man," Tom had said, then shuffled back to bed. Jake envied that, the way Tom could shrug off the world like it was a loose bolt he'd tighten later. For Jake, everything felt tight, rusted shut, ready to snap. Morning crept in gray and sluggish. His phone buzzed on the armrest, screen lighting up with Lena's name. He squinted at it, bleary-eyed, and let it hum itself silent. Another buzz, 2 texts this time. He didn't read them, didn't need to. He could guess the flavor. First the venom, sharp and accusing. "How dare you leave me like this?" Then the bait, softer, fishing for a bite. "Jake, come on, let's talk." He flipped the phone face down and hauled himself upright, joints popping like old pipes. The fight replayed anyway, uninvited. Her sneer, the way she'd stood there, arms crossed, daring him to break. And he had. He splashed water on his face in Tom's tiny bathroom, the mirror showing a man he barely recognized, hollow cheeks, dark circles, a jaw clenched too tight. His clothes still carried a faint whiff of sewer, so he dug through his duffel for a wrinkled flannel and jeans stiff with wear. Work was waiting, a leaky faucet at a duplex across town, and he needed the rhythm of it, the clank of tools, the puzzle of a fix. Something he could control. Tom was in the kitchen, flipping a pancake with a flourish that sent it splattering onto the counter. "Morning, sunshine," he called, grinning over his shoulder. His grease-stained t-shirt hung loose, and a cigarette dangled unlit from his lips. He'd quit smoking but liked the look. "You sleep like a champ, or what?" "Like a brick," Jake lied, grabbing his toolbox. "Gotta run." "Hold up, hero." Tom slid a plate across the counter, pancakes, slightly charred, drowning in syrup. "Fuel up. You look like death warmed over." Jake hesitated, then sat. The first bite was sweet, sticky, a small mercy. Tom leaned against the fridge, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. "So, you gonna tell me why you're crashing here? Or do I guess?" Lena finally set the place on fire. Jake chewed slow, staring at the plate. "We're done," he said, flat as a hammer strike. "That's it." Tom whistled low. "Damn. 7 years? Huh? What did she do? Stab you with a fork? Called me a dirty plumber." Jake's voice cracked on the words, and he hated it. Meant it, too. Tom's grin faded. He set the mug down, scratching his neck. "That's cold, man. Even for her." He paused, then tried lightening it. "Hey, at least she didn't say stinky. Could have been worse." Jake didn't laugh. He pushed the plate away, half-eaten, and stood. "See you later." The job site was a duplex on Elm Street, paint peeling off the siding, gutters sagging like they'd given up. Jake parked his truck and hauled out his gear, the damp air clinging to his skin. Inside, the tenant, a wiry old guy with a yapping terrier, pointed him to the kitchen sink. A steady drip plinked into a mixing bowl, the sound hypnotic, almost soothing. Jake knelt, toolbox open, and got to work. Wrench in hand, he tightened the fitting, replaced a washer, tested the flow. Fixed. Clean. Done. The old man grumbled a thanks and handed him a crumpled tin as a tip. Jake pocketed it, nodded, and moved on. Next stop was a bigger gig, a strip mall with a flooded basement. He pulled up beside a white van marked River Plumbing, the company he'd been with for a decade. Another plumber was already there, crouched by a sump pump, her dark ponytail swinging as she worked. "Maria." She glanced up, brown eyes sharp but warm, and gave him a quick nod. "Hey, Jake. You're late. Thought you drowned out there." "Close enough," he said, setting his tools down. She was newish, 6 months on the crew, but steady. A single mom, he'd heard, with a kid and a knack for unclogging drains faster than anyone. She didn't talk much, didn't need to. Her hands told you she knew her stuff. They tackled the mess together, ankle-deep water, a tangle of pipes, a pump that whined like a dying animal. Jake focused hard, shutting out the noise in his head, letting the job swallow him. Maria worked beside him, efficient, no fuss. When they finally got the water draining, she straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Not bad," she said. "You're good at this." He shrugged, brushing it off, but her words stuck. "Good at this. Not dirty. Not nothing. Just good." She pulled 2 styrofoam cups from a thermos in her van and poured coffee, black and steaming. Handed him one. "Break time. You look like you need it." He took it, the heat seeping into his palms. They leaned against the van, sipping in silence, watching cars splash by on the wet road. Then she said, casual, "Rough night?" "Rough life," he shot back, surprised at his own bite. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. He softened. "Wife trouble?" "Ex-wife, now, I guess." Maria nodded, like she got it. "Been there. Mine took off when my boy was 2. Sometimes it's better when they go." He looked at her, really looked, tired lines around her eyes, but a strength in her stance. No pity, no judgment. Just fact. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "Maybe." She smirked, a flicker of mischief. "Least you've got your pipes." They don't talk back. He chuckled, small, rusty, but real. The first laugh in days, maybe weeks. It felt like cracking ice, letting something thaw. They finished their coffee, tossed the cups, and got back to work. That night, back on Tom's couch, the phone buzzed again. Lena. He ignored it, same as before, but the weight pressed harder. He grabbed a notebook from his bag, an old one, spiral-bound, meant for job notes, and a stubby pencil. The words came slow, clumsy, spilling onto the page like water from a busted tap. She never saw me. Just the dirt. He stared at it, the letters jagged in the dim light, then shut the book. Sleep didn't come easy, but when it did, it was deeper than the night before. The weeks bled into each other, a blur of copper pipes, dripping faucets, and the hum of Jake's truck engine cutting through Milton's gray mornings. His hands moved on autopilot now, twisting wrenches, threading joints, sealing leaks with a precision that felt like breathing. Work wasn't just a paycheck anymore. It was a lifeline, a tether to something solid when everything else had turned to quicksand. He'd wake before dawn on Tom's creaky couch, the air thick with the musk of old cardboard and motor grease, and haul himself out the door before his brother could crack another joke. Routine was his armor: work, journal, sleep, and he wore it like a second skin. Tom's spare room had become less a crash pad and more a cave, the unpacked boxes closing in like walls of a trench. Jake didn't mind. The clutter matched the mess in his head, scattered pieces he hadn't figured out how to fit back together. His phone stayed silent most days, flipped to Do Not Disturb, but the whispers still found him. Mutual friends, guys from high school, couples they'd grabbed beers with, started dropping hits. "Lena's posting again," they'd say, casual but loaded, like they were testing him. "Says you walked out over nothing. Says she's finally free of the deadweight." Jake would nod, shove his hands in his pockets, and mutter, "Good for her." He didn't bite back, didn't log on to see the damage. But the words clawed at him anyway, sharp little hooks digging into the soft spots he couldn't toughen up. Job sites were his escape. Monday, it was a busted water heater in a laundromat, steam hissing like a dragon as he wrestled it into submission. Tuesday, a clogged drain at a diner, the cook tossing him a free burger for the effort. Wednesday, he was back with Maria, the two of them knee-deep in a flooded cellar at an old warehouse. She'd become a fixture now, her white van parked beside his truck more days than not. She didn't hover, didn't pry. Just worked, steady and sure, her quiet competence a balm to his frayed edges. They'd fall into an easy rhythm, passing tools without a word, the clank of metal and slosh of water filling the silence. One afternoon, sprawled on a patch of gravel outside the warehouse, they split a thermos of her coffee, bitter, strong, the kind that jolted you awake. The sun hung low, painting the sky orange, and Maria kicked a pebble with her boot. "You ever talk about it?" she asked, not looking at him. "The ex." Jake took a slow sip, the heat scalding his tongue. "Not much to say. She hated me. I left." She snorted, a dry little laugh. "Sounds familiar. Mine hated me too till he didn't. Took off with some bartender, left me with a toddler and a stack of bills. Best thing he ever did, walking out." He glanced at her, surprised. She rarely opened up, but there it was, cracked open, raw but steady. "You don't sound mad," he said. "Was at first. Cried a lot. Broke some plates." She grinned, faint but real. "Then I figured out I could breathe without him. Took a while, but I got there." Jake turned that over, the idea of breathing free. "I gave her everything," he said, voice low, like he was confessing to the gravel. "Overtime, weekends, every damn cent. She'd still look at me like I was trash stuck to her shoe." Maria nodded, no pity in her eyes, just understanding. Some people don't see what's right in front of them. They're too busy chasing what's not. He didn't reply, just drank his coffee and let the words settle. Later, as they packed up, she tossed him a spare wrench he'd dropped. "You're not trash, Jake," she said, simple, like it was fact. "Don't let her make you think it." That stuck with him, rattling around his skull as he drove home, the truck's headlights slicing through the dusk. Not trash? He wanted to believe it, but the sting of Lena's rants, filtered through those damn friends, kept gnawing. By Friday, it was too much. He clocked out early, swapped his work boots for sneakers, and hit the Rusty Nail, a dingy bar on the edge of town where the jukebox wheezed old country tunes and the beer was cheap. The place was half dead, a few grizzled regulars hunched over their pints, a bartender wiping glasses with a rag that looked older than the building. Jake slid onto a stool, the vinyl cracked and sticky, and ordered a draft. Then another. The buzz hit fast, warm and fuzzy, loosening the knots in his chest. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over Lena's name. Her last text glowed up at him, Sent 3 days ago. You're a coward, Jake. Running doesn't fix this. Anger flared, hot and reckless. He could call her, unload 7 years of pent-up hurt, tell her exactly where she could shove her deadweight crap. His finger twitched, then froze. The bar lights blurred, the beer sloshing in his gut, and he saw it. Her voice on the other end, sharp and smug, twisting everything back on him. She'd win, even if he yelled. She always did. Damn it, he muttered, and hurled the phone across the booth. It skidded, hit the wall with a thunk, and landed screen down on the grimy floor. The bartender glanced over, unimpressed. You break it, you buy it. Jake ignored him, fishing the spiral notebook from his jacket instead. The pencil was down to a nub, but it'd do. He flipped to a blank page, the paper creased and soft from nights of scribbling, and let it pour out. She's poison, he wrote, the letters slashing hard. Years of me breaking my back, and she calls me nothing. Dirty. Like I'm the mess she can't wash off. I'm done bleeding for her. The words spilled fast, messy, a flood he couldn't stop. I fixed her life. Rent, clothes, that damn car, and she never saw it. Never saw me. He kept going, page after page. Anger first, then something sharper, clearer. I'm not the villain here. She can scream it to the world, but I know what I gave. And I'm taking it back. His hand cramped, the pencil digging grooves into his thumb, but he didn't care. The bar faded, the clink of glasses, the twang of steel guitar, until it was just him and the paper, the weight lifting with every line. When he finally stopped, the notebook was heavier, thick with ink and truth. He shoved it back in his pocket, grabbed his phone, screen cracked but alive, and stumbled out into the night. The air was cool, sharp, cutting through the booze haze. He didn't call her. Didn't need to. The pages held it all, a map of where he'd been and where he was going. Back at Tom's, he collapsed onto the couch, the springs groaning under him. Sleep came fast, deep, the kind that didn't fight back. The journal stayed close, tucked under his arm like a shield. The apartment above Murphy's Hardware wasn't much, just a single room with a slanted ceiling, a mattress on the floor, and a hot plate plugged into a wobbly outlet. A folding chair sat by the window, overlooking the alley where delivery trucks rumbled in at dawn. Jake had hauled his toolbox up the narrow stairs 3 months ago, signed a month-to-month lease with a handshake, and called it home. The walls were bare, the floor scuffed, but it was his, paid for with his own sweat, no strings, no ghosts. He'd left Tom's couch behind, craving a space where the air didn't hum with someone else's life. Here, the quiet was his own, broken only by the occasional clatter of pipes in the old building or the creak of his footsteps on warped boards. It was a Thursday evening, the sky bruising purple outside, when the knock came soft, hesitant, not the bang of a delivery guy or a neighbor hunting spare change. Jake paused, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand, and crossed to the door. He swung it open, and there she was, Lena, standing in the dim hallway like a shadow that had slipped loose from his past. Her dark hair hung limp, framing a face paler than he remembered, her eyes red-rimmed and glassy. She wore a thin jacket, too light for the chill, and her hands twisted together like she was holding herself in place. "Jake," she said, voice small, cracked around the edges. "Can I come in?" He didn't move, just stared, the sandwich dangling forgotten at his side. Months had passed, 4, maybe 5, since he'd walked out into that rain-soaked night. He built a wall out of silence, dodging her texts, her calls, the rumors she'd spun online. And now here she was, uninvited, shrinking under the bare bulb flickering overhead. His gut twisted, not with longing but with something heavier, dread, maybe, or the echo of old wounds. He stepped aside, wordless, letting her in. She hovered near the door, eyes darting around the sparse room, mattress, chair, a stack of library books on plumbing codes he'd been studying. "This is it?" she asked, a faint tremor in her tone. "This is where you've been?" "It's mine," he said, setting the sandwich on the counter, a chipped slab of formica that came with the place. "What do you want, Lena?" She swallowed, crossing her arms tight. I messed up, Jake. I know that. I've been thinking about it, about us, and I was wrong. The things I said, that night," her voice broke, and she looked down, lashes wet. "I didn't mean it. I was mad stressed, but I didn't mean to hurt you like that." He leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching her. She was softer now, stripped of the venom that had fueled their last fight. Her hand shook as she brushed hair from her face, and for a second, he saw the girl he'd met at 19, nervous, hopeful, sketching doodles on napkins at the diner where they'd shared fries. But that girl was gone, buried under years of barbs and blame. "You didn't just hurt me," he said, steady, no heat in it. "You tore me apart. Every day. For years." Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "That's not fair. I was struggling too, work, money, all of it. You think I liked fighting? I was drowning, Jake. So was I." He pushed off the wall, stepping closer, his shadow falling across her. "Sleepless nights, pulling doubles, fixing crap I hated just to keep us going. I paid the rent early, Lena, and you still waved that damn notice in my face. Called me dirty. Like I was nothing. I didn't mean it," she cried, voice pitching high. "I was pissed, okay? You were always gone, always tired, and I felt alone. I lashed out. But I'm sorry. I am." She reached for his arm, fingers brushing his sleeve, and he didn't flinch away. Not yet. He looked at her hand, then her face, pleading, fragile, a crack in the armor she'd worn so long. "You're sorry now," he said, slow, "because you're lost without me. Not because you see me." "That's not true." Tears spilled, streaking her cheeks. "I miss you, Jake. The apartment's empty. I can't sleep. I need you. We can fix this. Please." The air thickened, heavy with her words, her scent, faint lavender, same as always. He could feel it, the pull of old habits, the muscle memory of giving in. He'd done it before, smoothed her rages, patched their fights with apologies that weren't his to give. Part of him wondered, was this salvageable? Could he go back, tweak the fittings, stop the leak? But then he saw it, the nights he'd come home bone-tired, her sneers waiting like traps, the way she'd shrunk him down to a smudge on her perfect life. "No," he said, stepping back, her hand falling away. "We can't." "Jake," she choked on his name, reaching again, but he shook his head. "I gave you everything I had," he said, voice low but firm, like a valve clicking shut. "Overtime I didn't get paid for, dinners I skipped, every ounce of me. And you made me feel small. Like I was your fix-it guy, not your husband. I'm not that anymore." She froze, mouth trembling, then sank onto the folding chair, shoulders hunching. "So that's it? You're done? 7 years, and you just walk away?" "I walked away months ago," he said. "You're the one who didn't notice." Silence stretched, brittle and cold. She wiped her face, stood, and moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "I loved you, you know," she whispered, not looking back. "Maybe not good enough, but I did." He didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind her, and the room swallowed the sound of her footsteps fading down the stairs. Jake stood there, staring at the spot where she'd been, doubt creeping in like damp through a crack. Had he thrown away something real? Was her softness a lifeline he'd cut too quick? He sank onto the mattress, elbows on his knees, and ran a hand through his hair, the quiet pressing in. The buzz of his phone jolted him upright. He grabbed it from the counter, Maria's name on the screen. He answered, voice rough. "Yeah. Hey," she said, bright but careful. "You busy?" "My kid's bike chain popped off again, and he's driving me nuts. You're better at this stuff than me." He exhaled, a slow release, the knot in his chest loosening just a fraction. "Yeah, I can swing by. Give me 20. Sweet. See you." She hung up, and he sat there, phone warm in his hand. Maria, steady, no games, just a job and a kid and a bike that needed fixing. Nothing big, nothing heavy, just enough. He grabbed his jacket, his toolbox, and headed out, the stairs creaking under his boots. The alley air hit him sharp and clean, washing away Lena's lavender ghost. Doubt lingered, a faint echo, but he shoved it down. He'd fixed enough broken things. This time, he was done patching what wouldn't hold. The sun cracked the horizon early, spilling gold through the crooked blinds of Jake's apartment above Murphy's Hardware. He stirred awake on the mattress, the springs quiet for once, like they'd finally made peace with his weight. No alarm needed. He'd been rising with the light these days, a habit carved from months of shedding old shadows. He stretched, joints popping like a chorus of tiny snaps, and swung his legs over the edge. The room glowed soft, the bare walls catching the dawn, and for a second, he just sat there, breathing it in. Not a palace, not even close, just a single bulb dangling from the ceiling, a folding chair, a duffel still half unpacked in the corner. But it was his, and that was enough. He shuffled to the counter, the linoleum cool under his bare feet, and flipped on the hot plate. A dented kettle hissed to life, water bubbling as he scooped instant coffee into a chipped mug. The aroma hit him as sharp, earthy, a jolt of normalcy. While it steeped, he grabbed the notebook from the bedside crate, its spiral spine bent and fraying. The thing was thick now, pages bulging with ink, a messy chronicle of nights spent spilling his guts. He flipped it open, skimming the jagged lines. She never saw me. Just the dirt. That was the first, raw and furious. Further in, the tone shifted. I'm not the villain. I'm not her fix. The latest, scrawled last week. I'm still here. That's something. He traced the words with a callous thumb, a faint smile tugging his lips. Not poetry, not even pretty, just true. Coffee in hand, he leaned against the counter, sipping slow. The brew was bitter, cheap, but it warmed him through. He wasn't rich as hell. After the split, he'd barely scraped together the deposit for this place. The truck needed a new muffler, his boots were wearing thin, and the plumbing gigs paid just enough to keep the lights on. But the weight was gone, not all of it, not yet, but enough to feel the difference. No more tiptoeing around Lena's moods, no more grinding himself down to fit her frame. He was lighter, looser, like a pipe cleared of rust and sludge. The phone buzzed. Maria, right on time. You still coming? She asked when he picked up, her voice bright with that easy calm he'd come to lean on. Yeah, he said, setting the mug down. Be there in 10. Cool. Danny's already circling the yard like a tornado. Save me. He chuckled, the sound rough but real. On it. He pulled on a flannel, grabbed his toolbox, and headed out. The stairs creaked under his boots, the alley air crisp with morning chill. His truck coughed to life, a loyal beast despite its rattles, and he rolled the window down, letting the breeze whip through. Maria's place was a 15-minute drive, a little duplex on the edge of town, white paint chipped but the yard tidy, a tricycle tipped over by the steps. He pulled up, and there was Danny, her 5-year-old, pedaling a wobbly bike in frantic loops, the chain dangling like a broken snake. Jake, Danny hollered, skidding to a stop, his sneakers kicking up dust. It's busted again. Looks like it, Jake said, climbing out. He ruffled the kid's dark hair, same shade as Maria's, and crouched by the bike. Let's get you rolling. Maria stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, wearing a faded hoodie and a grin. You're a saint, you know that? He's been at it since 6. More like a sucker, Jake shot back, but he smirked, already digging a wrench from his box. The chain was a quick fix, slipped off the gear, nothing snapped. He threaded it back, tightened the bolts, gave the wheel a spin. Danny hovered, bouncing on his toes, then hooped when Jake handed it over. Fixed. The kid tore off, tires humming against the dirt, a blur of wild energy. Jake stood, wiping grease on his jeans, and caught Maria's eye. She laughed, a full, warm sound that cut through the morning, and he couldn't help it. He laughed too, low and easy, the kind that loosened something deep in his chest. Kid's a menace, he said, brushing his hands off. Tell me about it. She nodded toward the porch. Want a refill? You earned it. Nah, gotta roll. Job's waiting. He hefted the toolbox, but lingered, watching Danny zoom past. He's fast. Too fast, she said, shaking her head. Thanks, Jake. Really. Anytime. He met her gaze, steady, no pressure, just a quiet trust that had grown between them. Not romance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But a foundation, solid as concrete. He liked that. Liked her. It was enough. Back in the truck, he cranked the engine and hit the road, the duplex shrinking in his rear view. The radio crackled on, an old tune spilling out, Springsteen, Thunder Road, all grit and promise. He tapped the wheel, humming along, the lyrics weaving through him like a memory he hadn't lived yet. The screen door slams, Mary's dress waves. The sun climbed higher, painting the windshield gold, and he felt it, a shift, subtle but sure. A smile crept up, small at first, then wider, tugging his face into something unfamiliar but good. A hard-won thing, carved from the rubble of what he'd left behind. The job was a simple one, a leaky sink at a split-level house on Birch Lane, the kind with faded shutters and a dog barking in the yard. He pulled up, gravel crunching under the tires, and killed the engine. The radio faded, but the melody lingered in his head, a quiet hum as he grabbed his toolbox from the bed. He stepped out, boots steady on the ground, and squinted at the house. A woman waved from the porch, gray hair tied back, her voice calling over the breeze. "You the plumber?" "Yeah," he said, walking up. "That's me." She pointed him to the kitchen, and he got to work, same as always, wrench in hand. Water shut off, a drip silenced in 10 minutes flat. The lady thanked him, pressed a 5 into his palm, and he was back in the truck, the day stretching ahead. More jobs, more fixes, more miles. Nothing grand, nothing flashy, just a life, his own, flowing clear. He didn't have much. No big savings, no fancy plans, no one waiting at home with a hot meal. But he had this, the road, the tools, the sun warming his arm through the open window. He had Danny's grin, Maria's laugh, the notebook stuffed with pieces of himself he'd fought to reclaim. And he had that smile, still clinging to his lips, a victory no one could take. The truck rumbled on, carrying him forward, ready for whatever came next. If this story hit home for you, whether it's the fight for peace, the sting of hard choices, or the quiet wins that matter most, let me know. Share your thoughts below, or tell me about a time you had to walk away to find yourself. Subscribe for more thrilling stories. See you soon.